everybody. Good evening, and welcome to Dia's Artists on Artists program. I'm Jasmine Raymond, and I'm delighted to introduce TJ Wilcox tonight. As you may imagine, asking an artist to talk about his or her work is already difficult enough, let alone asking them to talk about an artist that is not here, and then add that another level and ask them to speak about an artist in Dia's collection, and in his case, Dan Flavin. But tonight, we're very fortunate to have TJ with us because he will guide us through a collage of anecdotes and visual information about Dan's passion for the Hudson River School. And I'm sure the appeal has something to do with the speaker's work. TJ Wilcox was born in Seattle in 1965 and currently lives in New York. Last month, he opened an exhibition at Hiromi Joshi in Tokyo. And among his recent solo exhibitions, we recently saw in 2007 Metro Pictures. He had a solo show at the Stedelijk Museum in Amsterdam, the Kunstmuseum in Munich in 2005, at the ICA in London in 1998. His film has been screened at the Walker, at MoMA, and at the Tate Modern. TJ Wilcox is an artist who has given himself permission to navigate the depth of language and narrative and thread fact and fiction into his handmade films and found footage collages in photography. Telling his stories through vignettes of images, his narratives, which are often fantastical, borrow on a range of reference from the historical to popular culture. We at DIA are tremendously grateful to the Art on Artists' Sake Fund and to the SEA Foundation for their support of this program over the years. The Artists on Artists program would not be possible without the skillful organization and brilliance of assistant curator Christine Poor and the technical wisdom of Practic Hellman. Above all, this program owes its identity and its history to Lynn Cook, DIA's curator at large. And she's not here tonight with us because she's in Madrid, but many of you probably been here before and seen Lynn in her role both as curator and chief curator of DIA over many years, 18 years. We're forever indebted to her commitment to giving artists the upper hand, and her legacy and history to this program and to DIA's history, it's immeasurable. Please help me welcome TJ Wilcox.
Well, thank you. I'm so nervous. Let me get that out of the way. You know, what you said is absolutely right. I'm sort of used to speaking about my own work, and I guess I feel if, I can wing it with that. But being invited to speak about someone else's work is a different kind of responsibility. Lynn Cook asked me to speak about something in someone in Dia's collection. And I have to confess, actually, I have always loved Dia, and I came to New York as a student in the late 80s. And so I started suggesting topics for this. At first, I mentioned Gober, and on. People, with whose work I'm a bit more familiar, Diana Thader and Jorge Pardo. And they reminded me that actually it's been a very long time since Dia was actually collecting. And so I asked them to send me a list of their collection. And this is what I got in my email. And so, I was reminded that, of course, this is what it is. And I was looking at the list, fantastic artists all. And the one thing that really stood out as kind of the odd man out was the Hudson River School. And I thought, well, that's peculiar. and how did they slip in as a crew, as a group? And so in some kind of crazy moment of extroversion, which I don't possess tonight, I agreed to come and speak about the Hudson River School and how they came to be part of Dia's collection. I've done this very sort of low-tech thing. I was just in Europe this weekend, and so I've actually written this out by hand. I have a PowerPoint presentation and handwritten script, so forgive me if this gets a little convoluted. So I guess I wanted to, as I started to think about talking about the Hudson River School, it occurred to me that in the context of DIA, I couldn't really speak about them without talking about Dan Flavin, or I guess, how the Hudson River School actually came to be here at DIA. And so obviously that brings up the subject of Dan Flavin. He was the person who, with the cash and the support of DIA, actually collected this work. Oh God, I shouldn't have written this all out like this. I guess, having brought up Flavin, I should also say that I've had to wrestle with the sense that I'm betraying another artist's wishes in speaking about him directly. There was almost nothing in life that Flavin liked less than to have anyone discuss or try to define his practice. And when they inevitably got it wrong, his pen could be quite vicious or poisonous, and he reserved a special loathing for art criticism. And as I mentioned to several people that I was going to talk about Dan Flavin and the Hudson River School, they said, "Oh, really? Like you're taking that on?" And I didn't really, frankly, even understand. But of course, as I started to delve into his writings and work, I understood a bit more closely what he had, or why they might have come to that conclusion. But so, with that in mind, I'm going to try to confine my references to Flavin to either his words and texts, or the texts of people who were sympathetic authors with whom he was personally familiar and who quote him directly. And having said that, I actually know I'm going to cheat and not do that consistently, but for the most part, those are the ground rules here. I'd like to speak about why Flavin came to care about the Hudson River artists and their artwork, their working methods, and their lives. I'd like to say something, I think it's incumbent in a conversation like this to talk about DIA's commitment at the direction of Heiner Friedrich to permanent single artist installations, something that are still maintained, but that kind of great idea has gone by the by for a variety of reasons. And I should say that the Hudson River School, as many of you probably know, is a very unwieldy group, and it's quite large, and it would be very difficult for me to talk about all of them. So actually, I've decided tonight to kind of confine myself to two of them, both of who are kind of key figures in that school, as it's known, and both of whom Flavin spoke about specifically, and that's Frederick Church and John Kensett. I think that gets us through this. Let's see. So here's a very romantic image of Flavin. Actually, this was taken as he looking over the Hudson River Valley. So I guess we'll begin with Flavin. I'm also going to do this very sort of cribbing school boy, not that I'm much of a boy at this point, but crutch, which is that I am going to, see all my nice Post-it notes, I'm actually going to be reading you some selections from some of the comments. So actually, what I found really kind of compelling in this very beautiful book that Katie Holman's designed, and Michael Govan and Tiffany Bell and a variety of people contributed to, is what I have discovered is a fairly well-known text that Flavin produced for Art Forum in the mid-'60s, in 1965. And I find it a particularly kind of compelling document. And so I'd like to kind of linger with it for a moment and sort of point out several things that he mentions that I think are kind of key to getting at both his work and maybe some of his interests in the Hudson River School. So this was obviously quite a rare text. It's called, for him, because he so disliked speaking publicly or about himself, and it's titled In Daylight or Cool White. It's an autobiographical sketch. It describes, it's very distilled, and it's a good introduction to the way that he used language, which is often rather stilted or very particular anyway. And he describes a series of epiphanies, which seems like a grand way to put it, but I actually think that comes close to the language that he used to describe these exceptional moments in his own development as a young person and as a young artist that he kind of carried with him through his life. And actually, it reminded me of something when I was in art school. Someone told me once, you'll only have a few good ideas in your life, and so you'll have to wring from those ideas as much as you possibly can. And of course, the trick in that is knowing what those ideas are and culling them from all of the ones we might have. And I think that that's something quite exceptional about Flavin. He was a great kind of editor, and he knew when something exceptional or particularly relevant to him had kind of come to the fore. So let's see here. The first thing I'm going to read, when I was saying that he's quite sharp, I wanted to read his description of his parents. He says, "I was born screaming, a fraternal twin, 24 minutes before my brother, David, in Mary Immaculate Hospital, Jamaica, New York, at about 7 in the morning on a wet Saturday, April Fool's Day, 1933. Of an ascetic, remotely male, Irish Catholic truant officer, whose junior I am, and a stupid, fleshy tyrant of a woman who had descended from German royalty without a trace of nobility." There's mom and dad. So he goes on to describe the kind of hideous childhood that you might assume that these people would inflict on him, but then says, "While a young boy, I began drawing by myself. Uncle Artie Schnabel, the vice president of my father's East River Boat Club, became my first instructor on art. He was a portly, ebullient, red-faced old World War veteran whose battered left leg bore a brace and pained him gravely when it was about to rain. Also, he had been gassed. I saw his purple heart. On a certain sunny Sunday afternoon, dockside on the river, Uncle Artie set aside a stein of beer, adjusted his glasses for close observation, and showed me how to put down pencil water around ship by lightly dappling just some of the surrounding space with the tiniest half moons. His cosmic touch for space is in my drawings even now." And that seems, as I have moved through his work and his reflections, to be such a compelling statement, really, in the sense that drawing and his connection with kind of looking at the everyday world and, in this case, making this kind of working drawing from it, became a kind of salvation for him, which is a grand word, but became something that that elevated the banality of the life he thought he had led to that point. It seems like drawing from that moment on held this special place in his life and helped him to kind of navigate his journey. At 14, here he continues, after David and I graduated from St. Jokes, the St. Joachim and Anne Parochial School, with honors, my father committed us to a junior seminary in Brooklyn in order that we might doubly fulfill his own lost vocation for priesthood. No one had examined me as to whether or not I wanted to go there, but that seemed hardly to matter since I had not been permitted to consider much else since consciousness. I continued to draw, to doodle somewhat privately in class in the margins of my textbooks. Young Father Fogarty, in my second year Latin professor, was unimpressed with such demonstrations of talent, especially as they evolved in his class against the daily lesson plan. He often censored, even ridiculed me. Nevertheless, I acquired a certain personal power with him. When he chastened me, I noticed that he blushed redder than I did. My grades failed so evidently by once repeated senior year that I felt compelled to flee seminary failure for the terrifying profanity of life outside 1914 Gothic walls, which, importantly, I had never experienced. Somehow, at 18, I began to think about art. So it seems to me that his course was set. I mean, he knew that this was in the midst of a bleak and dreary, unhappy childhood. He felt himself to be sort of, overweight, unattractive. He was unhappy with his family. Drawing presented itself, and art making presented itself as an escape for him. Nevertheless, like many Catholics, he had, in spite of the fact that he was not drawn to religiosity, he was compelled by the spectacle of Catholicism and his ability to earn some money from putting on a good show. And what I mean by that is that he said, soon religion was forced upon me to nullify whatever expressive childhood optimism I may have had. In time, I grew curiously fond of the solemn, high funeral mass, which was so consummately rich in candlelight, music, chant, vestments, processions, and incense. And besides that, I got 15 cents a corpse serving as an acolyte. His first wife, Sonia, and I loved this anecdote about her. She, who was his electrician, she did all of his electrical work, said in an article in the Telegraph in the UK, he always rejected any notion of spiritual significance in his work. I think that what Dan did was to substitute art for all those parts of him that had been taken up with faith and transcendentalism. Because he clearly had the predisposition for a thought process that produces faith or inquiry into something other than our mundane life. And he was intellectual enough to make the transfer for himself to the practice of art. The same feelings are involved, but it's a different medium. Finally, on to his first lights. This was his drawing, obviously, for the diagonal of personal ecstasy, which is why I sort of take the liberty of using the word epiphany when I say that these things revealed themselves to him in kind of moments of clarity. He says about his lights, Somewhat in my mind at this time were quietly rebellious thoughts about proposing a plain, physical, factual painting of firm plasticity in opposition to the loose, vacuous, and overwrought tactile fantasies spread out about yards of cotton duck. So much for the abstract expressionist painters, which inevitably overwhelmed and stifled the invention of their practitioner victims, a declining generation of artists whom I could easily locate in prosperous commercial galleries. I do not mean to be misleading. I had to start from that blank, almost featureless, square-fronted construction with obvious electric light, which could become my standard yet variable emblem, the icon. During the spring of 1963, I felt sufficiently founded in my new work to discontinue it. From a recent diagram, I declared the diagonal of personal ecstasy, the diagonal of May 25th, 1963, a common 8-foot strip with fluorescent light of any commercially available color. At first, I chose gold. Not insignificant choice of gold. Let me just see here. As it's not hard to identify the gold color of light as a gold icon. This is from Michael Govin's description of Flavin's practice. Furthermore, the diagonal of personal ecstasy is not hard to read. Says, according to the critic Anna C. Shav, as literally a hot rod, a phallic reference no doubt intended by the artist. In Catholic terms, of course, ecstasy has another more spiritual meaning, exemplified by St. Teresa's account and immortalized in Bernini's 17th century sculpture in Rome. Ecstasy is a jointly spiritual and physical communion with God's presence. Flavin's early work is infused with Catholic tropes, not unlike James Joyce's texts. As Umberto Eco has observed, Joyce abandons the faith, but not religious obsession. And I think there's something there to be said. Oh, and I also wanted to reference the lovely Hal Foster here, who says, with Flavin, minimalist anti-illusionism begins to be trumped as an expanded field of illusionism. It moves beyond the frame of painting and off the pedestal of sculpture into a realm less of specific objects than of pictorial space, unbounded and writ large. In a sense, Flavin was graphic from the start. He was long interested in drawing, especially American landscapes, which he collected, and the shift here is in the nature of the ground to be marked. Might his primary achievement be not only to abstract this pictorialism, but to atomize it? In his minimalism, if that is still the proper term, to literalize is also to pictorialize. Flavin does not negate illusionism so much as he extrudes it into actual space. Dan Graham once called the effect reverse illusionism. So anyway, I think that these three aspects, the drawing, the spectacle of Catholicism, and the lights, which he identifies really in this first text, stay with him and continue to inform the practice as it evolves. While he became increasingly well known for his light works, drawing remained a daily and important aspect of his working method. He described and admired drawings, in particular, of other people that he thought of as working drawings. And he was living at the time in the Hudson River in a town called Garrison, and he started to go around. He actually was kind of a collector. He seemed to have sort of collecting fever. There actually seems to be somewhat of a connection between him and Warhol in this respect, because his collecting kind of desires were quite broad. And here's his diagonal. These are actually drawings by Church from his expedition to the North Seas to see icebergs for his famous painting, The Icebergs. And this was the sort of drawing that Flavin particularly admired. These drawings that were made guilelessly to sort of record a moment in time. Really records of looking and records of thinking. Back to my text here. He said, "I like art as thought better than art as work. I've always maintained this. It's important to me that I don't get my hands dirty. It's not because I'm instinctively lazy, it's a declaration. Art is thought." He embraced the everyday. In place of the transcendent in art, Flavin proposed a simple, fresh possibility. I believe that art is shedding its vaunted mystery for a common sense of keenly realized decoration. Symbolizing is dwindling, becoming slight. We are pressing downward toward no art, a mutual sense of psychologically indifferent decoration, a neutral pleasure of seeing known to everyone. He really placed a great priority on ephemerality. And I think that he was really attracted to, this is Icebergs, that those were studies for by Church. Another image here, and you can see this is actually a painting by Church, but you can see also why he would be, to a man who was invested with working with light, why something like this, Twilight in the Wilderness, he would find compelling. He actually preferred the drawings of John Kensett, whose mark making had this very kind of elegant and simple quality. This is the first was from Rose Island, Killarney, and this is Stolzenfels. These are obviously from his European wanderings, and this is the Catskill Mountains. Yes. I wanted to read you his poem. 105. Oh, this is in his interview with Tiffany Bell, when she asked him if he was interested in obtaining a kind of permanence in his work, and she was specifically asking if he was interested in permanence through Dia, and he replied, "Well, you know what I think of that already. I mean, one has no choice but to accept the fact of temporary art. Permanence just defies everything. There is no such thing. I have no hope for that. I used to say that I did my certificates on pulp paper because therefore I knew they would disintegrate. I would like to leave a will and testament to declare everything void at my death. And it's not unrealistic. I mean it, because only I know the work as it ought to be. All posthumous interpretations are less. I know this. So I would rather see it all disappear into the wind, take it all away. It's electric current with a switch, dubious. Did you ever read that little poem I tried to write years ago about on and off or off and on art? I go with that, and rust and broken glass. I mean, you really have no choice." And I believe we have his. Oh, these are drawings that I actually think really relate to those drawings that he liked so much in Kensitz's work and in Church's work. This is Flavin in the 60s, not far from here, I suppose, off of the west side, on the West Side Highway, drawing electrical storms. And actually, I have something sort of nice about that. This is from Briony Fair, who wrote about Flavin's drawings. There is a series of drawings from 1960 of thunderstorms as seen from the Gansevoort Pier. They capture the most ephemeral effects of a thunderstorm in the most ephemeral medium, a tiny sketch on paper, and another and another. So let's see, what else do we have here? Oh, more of Flavin's drawings. These are variations for his monuments, installation drawings. And again, this is for the round lamps. I think this is for this one's the piece that's dedicated to George McGovern, to a man, George McGovern. Another of the dedicated pieces. But I mean to say that he really, it's not that this was the only drawing style that was available to him. He sought out this method and found this matched his sort of appreciation for the working drawings that he saw the Hudson River School artists producing. He was, here I'm going back to this. He really was a collector as well, and a cataloger and historian by nature. Researching the history of the places where he had lived and the things he had bought. He was a collector of American glass, stickly furniture, Native American crafts, Japanese prints, the 19th century American drawings, to name a few of his interests, and he sometimes recorded historical and descriptive information on long labels, which he affixed to the back of objects. In the same way, from his days as a young artist, he kept careful records describing his own work, journals documenting his methods, daily events, or letters written were kept along with annotated working drawings, often dated to the day of execution. With the help of his companions and assistants, Flavin kept well-organized files of letters, gallery invitations, installation floor plans, and other documentation surrounding his work. It was around this time when he was living in Garrison that he began to discuss the possibility of a permanent installation of his work in a site he'd found near his home. DIA at that time was devoting much of its energy and resources to the single artist installations. This is his poem. This is a picture of church, and one of his very precisely noted drawings. This is what Church would do. He would go out into the field and sketch a landscape and then indicate exactly where he wanted to put the colors. So in the foreground, there's greens and notes to himself so that he could, recall exactly what he had seen and transcribe that. And I actually even think it was not just kind of this method, but this idea of kind of being out in the world and collecting information that appealed to Flavin. Most of the Hudson River School painters would spend most of the spring and summer hiking and going on walks and having these kind of grand tours that they would sort of self-conduct. They were really travelers. And they would then come home to their studios in the winter and make these paintings from these. This is Kensett in his studio on 10th Street, and one of the late paintings for which he became so famous, of the sort that was particularly appealing to Flavin. But I wanted to get to Heiner and Philippa, Heiner Friedrich and his wife at the time, Philippa de Manil, who were closely involved with Flavin and wished to recast the role of contemporary art museum. They hoped that Dia would free artists from all worldly constraints and shelter their work in perpetuity. Michael Kimmelman wrote, Friedrich explained that Dia was a Greek word meaning through, as in conduit. A dozen or so artists, Friedrich's chosen ones, would be freed, allowed to pursue work as they envisioned it. Dia didn't tap into something new, he said. It tapped into something old. Our values are as powerful as those in the Renaissance. For emphasis, he added, Dan Flavin is as important as Michelangelo. And another quote here from Bob Colacello. This was writing, it's kind of a pissy article, but he was writing in Vanity Fair at the time of Dia's financial troubles. His wife, Philippa, said that it was Heiner who came up with so much of the real vision of Dia. And then I got to know the artists and became fascinated by their work, and I caught on fire. So we were both completely convinced in what we were doing. We would have given up everything to realize it. Money wasn't the issue, it was generosity. Dia is about art, said Heiner. The 20th century clearly stands beside the Renaissance as one of the most powerful visual ages. We have artists of the magnitude of Titian, be it Andy Warhol, of the magnitude of Michelangelo, be it Dan Flavin, of the magnitude of Donatello, be it Walter Di Maria. This is why we did Dia. When I asked him if he had been brought up in a religious family, he snapped, "We were brought up as poor human beings. I was born in 1938 and lived in Berlin through 7 years of war. And from that experience, there has grown within me an enormous force of sanity, which wants to bring good and well-being to humanity." This is again from Tiffany Bell's interview. How did your involvement with Dia Art Foundation begin? And Flavin replied, by request of the deities themselves. Why is one elected or not is hard to figure out. Well, what do I think? The organizational outlook is stupendous and therefore unfulfillable, I would kind of guess. There is a fantastic artistic sentiment involved here. I really appreciate very much what they think to say they want to do, but the support mechanism probably can't be developed, even for the select few artists who are involved. I wish there was more realization of the projects that are proposed, and therefore, I wish the projects were more reasonable so they could be so served. But it has such heroic aspects in Heiner's mind, and that's awfully nice. In imagining his own museum, personal museum, because that's what they proposed to provide for Flavin, he might have been drawn to the example of Church, who devoted much of his time after the American Civil War to perfecting and embellishing his home, Olana. This is Olana. I actually recently took a trip up to Olana to see this in its fall glory. It didn't look quite this gorgeous the day that I was there, but he himself settled on a place that was known as Dick's Castle. Oh, this is the interior of Olana. It was constructed after the Civil War. Church's artwork had become sort of completely out of fashion, and he really retreated to this home, and it became his principal art project, if you could call it that, the decoration of this space. And he embellished it as a kind of souvenir of his travels in the Middle East. So this is the man who currently owns Dick's Castle. I thought he was great. I have to, when it was sold, I found the old kind of real estate ads about Dick's Castle. This is how it was described by Sotheby's in 1995. Because this fellow, when he bought it from Dia, he decided to turn it into condos. It's a whitewashed Moorish-style castle encompassing 35,000 square feet on 3 principal floors, plus 10,000 square feet of basement and work areas. It includes an arched courtyard, turreted towers, romantic balconies, sumptuous spaces reminiscent of a grander era, 25 fireplaces, 150 windows, and an 86-foot-high tower. Originally, it was the dream of Evans P. Dick. It was intended as a home to rival the great residences of Hyde Park. It was acquired in the 1880s, the site, and construction began in 1903, following a design inspired by the Alhambra of Granada, Spain. 100 laborers were imported to work on the structure, which stretched 175 feet long and 220 feet deep. In 1907, however, financial reversals terminated the project. It stood incomplete until 1979, when the Dia Arts Foundation acquired it and carried out a program of major structural reinforcement. The intended use, well, we know what the intended use was. And what I think is kind of fascinating about this site is that it was always a folly. It was never really finished. It's had a succession of owners throughout the 20th century. The first one managed to kind of create it as a shell. The next moved in and kind of lived in the tower. Dia owned it for a while and shored it up so it would live a bit longer. But it's been sort of a site of dreams and kind of aspirations, site of fantasy that's never quite come to pass. But you can see maybe why Flavin might have been attracted to preserving his work for all time in this space. What he hoped to do was make a series of installations of his work, but also to house this growing collection of drawings that he had been empowered to buy for Dia. So Dia literally gave him money to go out and, when he was, I don't know, meant to be in the studio or something, what he was really doing was driving around all day and going to antique stores and looking for various bits and pieces of his collection, which makes him a man after my own heart. And he envisioned this stuff in a permanent installation here in this beautiful house. I think sort of an interesting sidebar to all of this is that all of these various kind of component parts, and by that I mean Kensington Church and Flavin himself and maybe even Heiner Friedrich were pleasure seekers. They lived to not simply for their profession, but to have a really rich and profound experience of life. And there was something, it's hard to, you don't get that sense from Flavin's texts. He comes off as such a scold. And there was a remembrance that I found online that was by a curator called J. Beloli. This was printed on the occasion of the retrospective at LACMA, that had he was an assistant curator under Richard Koshalik at the Fort Worth Art Museum. And he remembered Flavin in a way that I would never have imagined from Flavin's own writings about himself. He says that they became friends because they were out to dinner and they realized they were both great fans of The Wizard of Oz. They were walking out of the dining room after finishing dinner, basically skipping down the entrance to the country club, singing "Follow the Yellow Brick Road." That was really the bonding. At the dinner, and particularly after that, I worked very closely with him on both shows. When he was in the Hamptons, they went around looking at antique shops, and he says Dia had promised Flavin his own museum in Bridgehampton. His early paintings on paper that I remember from the 50s, which were not surprisingly abstract expressionist works, had actual parts of poems in them or texts by Dan. My guess is Irish poets, and he did in fact make early drawings with quotes of Joyce embedded in them. There was some sort of romanticism there. It's who he was, and I don't think it ever completely went away. You can see it in the drawings of the sailboats, the prints, and the dedications in terms of the pieces. The portraits were not hard-edged portraits. They were very expressive portraits that he sketched. Flavin's portrait etching of me in the LACMA collection was printed by the artist Lawrence Scholder. And as I recall, Dan created it with a few quick lines. The personal and the expressive part of him was still there. However much he was associated with minimal art, appropriately so, there was something else that was going on in Flavin's art besides the rigor of his fluorescent installations. This is one of Flavin's late drawings from of a sailboat in the Hamptons, and as is this one. Flavin sustained his love of drawing and the efficient calligraphic quality of his sketches throughout his life, as is especially prevalent in many later landscapes and a series of abbreviated renditions of sailboats. I've been sort of on the trail of Flavin, I guess, for a little while as I tried to think about what to say about his drawings to all of you. And I went to, I have a house on the North Fork of the Long Island, and I drove from there to Bridgehampton, where he does have his permanent installation in this firehouse, which is beautifully installed and renovated by him with the help of Richard Gluckman. On the way there, it was recently, and we were having some gorgeous days, and I guess we were anticipating another because the sky was bright red. I was going on at the end of the day on a Sunday afternoon, and to get from the North Fork to the South Fork, you have to take two ferries, one that goes from Greenport to Shelter Island and another from Shelter Island to Sag Harbor. And it was the most spectacular journey because the light and my experience of sort of being in that coastal environment was I think close to what might have attracted Flavin to that area. It was so spectacular, and I got a sense of the materiality of light itself as I was driving across, and it just seemed like a particularly great sort of introduction to his installation in Bridgehampton. And so I got to the old, what was it? I think it was a Baptist church at some point, and then it was also maybe a firehouse. And it was sort of the end of the day, and I was there by myself. And I spent a fair amount of time with the work. And at some point, I heard two people come in, and they were discussing the Flavin. And I thought, I could tell from the sound of their conversation that one of them knew Flavin and one of them had no idea of who Flavin was. And they were just, the one who knew was really, describing and trying to enlighten his companion about the purpose of this house. And anyway, we finally found ourselves kind of next to each other, the three of us. And the knowledgeable one of these people said to me, well, this is odd that the three of us are standing here in this installation together. We might as well introduce ourselves to one another. And I said, that sounds terrific. I'm TJ Wilcox. It's nice to meet you. And he said, I'm Heiner Friedrich. And that seemed so incredible to me that that he would be there, and he gave me a, and so gratifying to know that his sort of, that some of these dreams that were kind of crafted by Dia in another era for all of us are still working, are still extant. And he said, how many times have you been here? And I said, this is my first time. And he said, well, it's my 1,000th time, and I hope that you'll come back 1,000 times. And I know that probably if Flavin were around, he would say, you should have just bought them all bus tickets to go out to this place and to see it. It would be much more sort of illuminating than anything you might say about my work. But I was struck by, this image of him. The first time I saw it, I thought he looked terrible. He's kind of like, well, whatever, there he is standing in front of his installation. But I came to love this photo because he's wearing his baseball cap. And I think, and I have come to know that he loved baseball and he loved that game of strategy and chance. And as much as his mind and his practice was filled with the conceptual rigor of minimalism, I think he was a man sort of deeply involved with paying close attention to the ephemeral and transient experiences of daily life. And so I think it's quite beautiful that here he is with his baseball cap in front of one of the sculptures for which he's so well known. And finally, I guess I should say that Heiner had a message for all of you, and for Dia in particular. He said, please remember that Dia isn't an institution. And I thought that was so lovely. And he wanted you to know that this space is still open, that it's available forever, and that the promise that he first experienced as a young person when he went to see Giotto's chapel lives on in this space. And that promise, I mean, is that this was his sort of gift to humanity, that some things can persist and transcend time and finances and wars and exist as a kind of totem to the beauty and the power and the ephemeral spirit of art making. So that's what I have to say about that. Oh, yeah, you can ask a question if you want. Yeah. Yes.
Do you remember your first interaction with the work of Dan Flavin and how that experience differs from an experience now?
You know, I always loved Dan Flavin's work. Actually, I remember seeing it as a child, and I think I found its immateriality really, in the language of kids, really rad, and I kind of couldn't believe that somebody, in the context of a contemporary art exhibition, would have produced something that was so intangible. And I think, you could get the sense of the degree to which he was finding his own way outside of the material kind of conventions and practices of artists, in his day, and even now. I mean, was a really radical path to choose light as a medium, and I think I always really connected with that, actually. Well, thank you all very much for coming.